Lucas, can you hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me? You hear me, Shelly? I think
Yeah.
you just muted yourself. Okay.
I muted. I think you unmuted me and then I muted myself back. So I can see
Oh, okay.
you're sitting in EP's room with your
I
headphones.
am.
And I
I'm
can hear you
sending out one more email really fast.
now. Okay.
All right. I think I'm back.
We have 15 minutes.
So when I get to this point, I just click on share screen. Is that right?
Yes. You should, that's what you should. You can do that
Let me
now
go
if
ahead
you
and
want
play
to
with it.
test it out.
Let's see here. Share. Let's see here. Let's see here.
Yeah, I can see that. Small fruits. Yes, that looks great.
Okay. Perfect.
Love
So
it.
you're going to be able to record on your end. Is that right?
It's already recording.
Oh, okay.
I guess I could pause it.
Hey everybody, we're trying a different format for some of these videos that we're doing to kind of highlight things we need to be doing in our garden. And a lot of people are inside right now, so we're trying to find some things that we can do in our landscapes, maybe things that we can plant outside. So I'm gonna go ahead and start sharing my screen, and hopefully, Shelly, you can see my screen. We're
Yes.
going to mainly be discussing, can you see it, Shelly?
Yes, it's great.
We're going to mainly be discussing small fruits for the home garden, and I'm going to try to mostly focus on blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, and grapes for just a little bit today. And I'm going to discuss strawberries, and this is going to be a little bit of a shorter video. We're going to try to keep it at about 30 minutes. So I think this year we're going to see an influx of people raising things in the garden. And I don't want you to have some of the myths that you have in your head sometimes right now. We see all the different types of fruit plants for sale in the store, and some of them are more challenging than others. So when you go to the store and you look at some of these things, some of the first things that go through your head, people will say things like, I just don't have the space. Well, I have a brown thumb. Well, I'm a horticulturist. I have killed plenty of plants already. And let me go ahead and tell you, if you're a gardener, plants are going to die. So I think we get the best practice from killing some of these plants to see which ones are easier to grow and which ones are more challenging. And also, I hear people say, well, I just don't have the time. And sometimes coupled with that, they'll say, I just don't have the knowledge about growing something like that. Well, how else are we going to learn if we don't try? And I think the best knowledge that we can gain is hands-on learning. And we see that with a lot of high schools, a lot of colleges. The best way some of these students learn is by hands-on applications. So I think we need to let the plant help out in some of these situations. When we look at the varieties of strawberries, blackberries, raspberries, and some of the ones we're covering today, some are stronger resistant against diseases. Some are stronger resistant against insects. And I think you need to let the plant help out in those cases. So I think if you have issues in your lawn with certain diseases, we try to find plants that work out in some of those situations. Soil pH also plays a role. And if you've never done a soil test, and I'm going to cover more about pH of blueberries, especially in just a few minutes, the soil pH really does play a role. The pH has to be the appropriate amount for the right plant. Certain plants like azaleas, rhododendrons, blueberries really like acidic soil. And to see if the pH is too high, they're not going to be happy. And they'll promptly tell you by turning yellow, the leaves can look chlorotic, or they'll die. Air and sunlight is also another way that we can let the plant help out. A lot of these diseases that we have on trees, shrubs, a lot of the fruit diseases especially, can be coupled where water sits on the leaf. If we prune properly, if we space the plants out properly, we're going to let Mother Nature actually help out with drying off those leaves and preventing some of these fungal pathogens that may come flying through the air. Now, some fruits require more sun than others. all the ones that we're going to be discussing today require full sun. So if we try to grow some plants that are full sun loving in really shade areas, they're not going to be acclimated to it, and they're not going to perform well, and they'll show you by not performing well. So if you've got a really low light area, some of these fruits that I'm discussing today may not even be an option to you. And also look at the cultural practices that you're doing. Are you fertilizing according to soil test? Are you actually pruning the way that they actually should be? Did you plant the plant properly into the ground? I'm going to cover just a little bit about some of the planting methods for some of those, but I think we need to let the plant help. And if we can, just try to buy some of these resistant varieties that are out there now. Even though some of the older ones, they taste better sometimes, some of the newer ones that are bred for disease resistance will really help out in the long run, and you're not having to use as many sprays. We kind of broke this down. So first we're going to be discussing blueberries. And first off, blueberry establishment can be laborious. And by that I mean we really need to start planting blueberries, planning in our head, not planting a year before we actually get them into the ground. Blueberries are extremely sensitive to pH, and if our pH is really, high when we plant them in the ground, they'll tell us, by being chlorotic, and I'll show you some leaves of what that looks like in just a few minutes. They are an excellent landscape plant. Blueberries bloom in the springtime. They turn red in the fall time. They provide us fruit in the summer, and I've actually seen some landscape beds now carrying blueberries. One other issue that we have with blueberries is birds can be troublesome. And I'll cover some ways to kind of help out with some of those bird issues that we have in just a few minutes. Ideally, if we're planting blueberries, the ideal pH is 4.5 to 5.5, which is pretty acidic on the pH scale. They need well-drained soil. They need a good moderate fertility. They need full sun. And we need an area where wildlife damage is low. So that can actually be deer also. And if you're living in subdivisions and your neighbors are feeding deer, that can be an issue. I've seen people have issues with blueberries with turkeys. We have a pretty good turkey population in Middle Tennessee, and I hear homeowners will say, I just remember that little turkey jumping up and down, eating all the blueberries off my tree as I watched it. So sometimes if you have wildlife issues, you may not be able to grow some of these fruits. So I do have a lot of emails, and one recently said, I love feeding the deer, but I want to grow some fruit trees. And I said, they just don't mix. That's a bucket of soil. If you've never performed a soil test at your property, whether your lawn, garden, if you're going to plant fruit in a certain area, I think a soil test is the way to go. Now, the Soil Pest and Plant Center will be able to help you with pH. They'll even give you recommendations on what type of fertilizers to actually use. And they'll tell you the amounts. They'll tell you when to use it. And if the pH is too high, they'll tell you the appropriate amount of whatever to add to drop the pH or raise the pH, whatever the case may be. Now, I mentioned wildlife issues on blueberries, and this was, I think, at one of the research centers here in Middle Tennessee, trying to keep the birds off of the blueberries. We may just have to break down and use bird netting sometimes so that we actually can get a crop. Site prep. When we go to the garden center, we go to the box store to buy blueberries, we just go and we buy them and we go ahead and throw them in the ground. We don't actually see what the pH is in the ground, so we don't really know if they're going to like it to begin with or not. That's where we fail in a lot of cases. Now, I'm an impulsive buyer at a garden center. If I see something extremely pretty and I want it, I'm going to buy it anyways. And it may sit in a pot for a year or two at my house before I figure out where I'm going to plant it. Blueberries, if the pH is too high, you may consider raised beds. So you can actually amend the soil a lot easier on raised beds than putting them in the soil that you already have existing at your property. Because sometimes we can see issues with people spending so much money trying to drop that pH. Their soil may just not be the right type of soil to grow blueberries, and they may be spending way more money on additives trying to drop that pH. And also, it's good to increase your organic matter levels in soil. And I use one of my favorite cover crops. That's actually turnip greens. I put it on my garden every year, and I usually turn it over in the springtime. I think anytime you can increase organic matter in your soil is a great thing. If you're like Middle Tennessee, we have clay, a lot of clay in our soil. So sometimes that organic matter will help that soil some. But if you're wanting to plant blueberries, I think you need to go ahead and get your soil tested now. Go ahead and start researching varieties. Don't buy plants until this fall or going into the winter time. You need to see if your soil is actually going to be appropriate enough for it or not. Raised beds, here's some pros to raised beds. Better water drainage if you have some areas. If you have a lot of clay and it's holding a lot of water, blueberries can rot, and also favors modification of the soil. So if the pH is too high in the subsoil below the raised beds, in the soil below the beds, it'll be easier to drop that pH in the soil that's already in the new bed. And raised beds are just easier to manage. And I've seen people build frames over the raised beds if they have bird type issues, and they'll put the nets. So I've seen like PVC stands over the raised beds, and they'll actually just put the net over just when the blueberries become ripe, because wildlife knows when your crop is ready to pick and eat. Manures, and we get a lot of questions about manures. They must be properly composted before being applied to crops. If you're using some of the organic type recommendations, I think they need to be out of the animal 90 days if it's a crop above the soil, and 120 days if it's a crop that's touching the soil. So that would be some of the leafy type greens. But all these manures need to be broken down before we actually apply them to any type of edible crop. And manures will vary by species and feed. Now, sometimes people will say, now, how much manure should I add? Now, I don't know. So each species of animals is fed differently, and some of the manures are actually richer than others, and some are less rich. One issue that we're seeing some now is we need to watch for herbicide residue. Be sure where your manure comes from. Some pasture weeds are controlled by some herbicides, and they can actually pass through the animal and go into the manure, and then that manure actually is put on your garden, and we've seen some residual effects of that. The two main branches of blueberries, we have RABBITEYE and HIGHBUSH. Now, RABBITEYEs are native to the southern part of the U.S. They survive better in drier, warmer temps. They can be grown without irrigation, but they're susceptible to frost because they bloom earlier than the HIGHBUSH. So if you're in an area that's prone to late frost, you may consider only the HIGHBUSH type varieties of blueberries. Now, the HIGHBUSH are native to the northern part of the U.S. They survive better in higher elevations in Tennessee. They bloom later and they mature earlier a little bit. And I'm going to show you some pictures of blueberries at different times of the year. But I think we need to be sure about the HIGHBUSH. We have a northern HIGHBUSH and we have a southern HIGHBUSH. Some of the southern HIGHBUSH were bred by some of the universities in the South, such as University of Florida. They are not really good blueberries for Tennessee. So kind of research some of those varieties. Kind of looking at some of these, if we see them the same week, we could have RABBITEYEs and HIGHBUSHes in the same row. Some will be ready and some will not be ready. If we research some of the ones that are early blooming and some that are late blooming, we can have a crop of blueberry that spans over 2 or 3 months, maybe even 4 months into the summer. So you're not all putting all of your eggs into one basket. Looking at some of the different cultivars of RABBITEYEs versus northern or southern HIGHBUSH. RABBITEYEs seem to do a little bit better in Tennessee, and that's what we see a lot of. Some of the recommendations are Tiff Blue, Climax, Bright Blue, and Bluebell. Now, this is not an all-intensive list. There are probably hundreds of cultivars of each one, and do your research before you plant some of these. Now, looking at some of the HIGHBUSH type blueberries, Blue Crop, Jersey, Berkeley, and Blue Ray, and all of these have been around for a number of years, and they've kind of been tried and true, and they've been tested. Now, Tiff Blue is kind of probably the most popular RABBITEYE blueberry that's around, and it seems to do the best in Tennessee. But that doesn't mean any of the newer ones are any less worthy of being planted in your garden. I am excited because University of Tennessee is doing a lot of blueberry trials right now, so we'll be able to see some of those results in the next couple of years. Now, blueberry production timeline, if we're looking at it, we need to go ahead and start getting our soil ready, getting some research done, our areas maybe amended if we needed to. If we're going to build raised beds, go ahead and get those done a year before we actually plant. Then we plant them. And this is the hardest part for most people. We need to remove the fruit the first 2 years to let that plant get established into the ground. So if we're looking at it, we shouldn't really harvest any type of fruit until the 3rd year. The plant needs to get established. It needs to kind of get growing in the soil that it has. It shouldn't be spending all of its time trying to grow and put on a crop of fruit at the same time. This is pink lemonade blueberry, and it's kind of a novelty type blueberry. I've seen it for sale at garden centers over the past few years. I've never really seen it do well in any Tennessee gardens right now. If you have any success with it, let me know. And it's supposedly a pink blueberry, but I don't know how well it's doing in some areas. But I've got a relative with one for 3 or 4 years, and he still hasn't had any fruit off of it yet. Planting on blueberries, they should be planted when they're dormant ideally. But when we go to the store and we're looking for blueberries, we see them for sale in the middle of summer in the hottest part of the year. You can mail order blueberry plants, and you can find them bare root, potted, or you can find them as plugs. About 5 or 6 feet apart in a row. Row spacing should be anywhere from 10 to 12 feet. And ideally, we need to have 2 or more varieties to help ensure pollination. Even though some of them will say they're self-fertile, it really does help out if you have 2 or more varieties to help out. The one issue that we have with blueberries, now they do have some disease issues, they do have some bug issues, and I'm not going to cover any of those today, but if you have some of those issues, feel free to reach out to your extension agent. If we're looking at the main issue, it's pH. And a plant will tell you if it's unhappy in the soil. It could be yellow, it'll be chlorotic, so yellow, and it has the dark green veins. That usually means on a blueberry the pH is too high. Also, clay soils can lead to soggy soils, the death in the soggy soils. Now, I kind of covered blueberries. I'm going to start going through some of the other ones for the next 10 or 15 minutes. Blackberries and raspberries, out of all the fruits that we could probably grow in Tennessee, I think blackberries and raspberries are the most disease resistant. They're the easiest to grow. We really don't have any problems with them, but they do need to be trained on some type of a structure, because sometimes those canes will get up so tall, they get so heavily fruited that they'll weigh back into the ground and they'll just lay in the mud. Most people don't want to eat blackberries that's been laying in the mud. By selecting different cultivars, you can have fruits over a 3 or 4 month period. If you can keep them about 300 feet away from the wild blackberries, that will help out with diseases, because sometimes the wild blackberries can be a vector for some diseases, so it'll actually hop over to your blackberries or raspberries. And that you can kind of see part of my screen right there. Avoid areas where verticillium could have been. Now, verticillium wilt, you'll see it on tomatoes, potatoes, peppers, and eggplants. It can also affect blackberries and raspberries. So you had a tomato plant, it basically wilts down over a couple of days and it's in the soil. So you don't want to plant a blackberry or a bramble, in that spot. Planting, ideally, we can go ahead and plant these in the springtime. So now is a great time to plant these. Pretty much adaptable to pretty much any type of soil, because if we think about it, blackberries in a lot of cases are weeds. And also, you should follow your soil recommendations for what the pH is and any fertilizer recommendations it may say. Now, I wanted to cover the 2 differences between the 2 different canes on a blackberry and a raspberry. Now, a prima cane is a cane that will bear fruit next year. So these come up midsummer into the fall time, and those are the ones that will have fruit next year. Floricanes are the canes that will have fruit this year. Now, we're not going to get into all the differences, because there are some blackberries that bloom every year on primicanes. There are some, floricanes. They bloom and flower they fruit every year on different canes. There are some that are primicane type bearing. But a lot of the older ones, we'll see some of those canes up. So once a cane comes up and bears fruit, at the end of the summer, it needs to be cut out, because that same cane will not bear fruit again. You need to let room for the primicanes to come up and actually bear fruit for next year. But there are some that bear. I think Primark 45 from the University of Arkansas bears on primocanes. One of the most popular home varieties that we've seen is Triple Crown, and it puts on a massive amount of fruit. Now, this was taken at Vol State. The Sumner County Master Gardeners have a bed there where they have some blackberries, and this Triple Crown, was really heavily weighted down with fruit, and it was really impressive. But they had it on some trellises, so you can kind of see some of the different trellises or support systems for some of these brambles. So the primocanes come up in the middle, they start bearing fruit, and then they lay over on top of those wires. So that's just one way. There are other structures that you can look up to help keep the fruit off of the ground. Strawberries, I put perennial because sometimes we see some ornamental type varieties of strawberries, and I don't think they've been tested out yet, but fruiting strawberries are perennial. We have two main types, are June bearing, we have a day neutral, so some will bear fruit the entire summer off and on, ever bearing, and then we have some that just put on fruit heavily at one time. Those are the June bearings. If we're planting strawberries in Middle Tennessee and in our state, pretty much April is an ideal time, and you can buy bare root plants. You can find plants potted up in the different stores right now also. And if you're doing it from a commercial standpoint, fall is the ideal time to plant these strawberries. From a home perspective, I see catalogs. I get a ton of seed catalogs every year, and it'll talk about strawberry seeds. It can be a challenge to grow strawberries from seeds. It's not impossible, but it can be a challenge, and it may be easier just to begin with plants overall. Well-drained soil, pH of 6 to 6.5, planted in early spring, which is right now, 18 to 24 inches apart and 3 feet between rows. And this is if you've got areas in your garden where you're going to have them in a straight line. Sometimes when they start pegging over and they start sending out those runners, we need to leave those runners alone if we're going to keep them there in the same area. Now, if we're doing a commercial type, they typically, get rid of the whole crop and then replant that fall. In the home perspective, we want those runners to run down. And ideally, this is hard also. We need to break all those flowers off the first year to let those plants get established, because plants can sometimes burn the candle at both ends and kind of fizzle out. They weaken themselves. So they'll try to put on all this fruit. They're trying to put on all this growth, and they're trying to establish roots into the ground. It needs to establish itself so that you can have a better crop next year. I like mulching on anything in the garden because it keeps, first off, mud off of the crop to begin with, and sometimes we see some diseases that splash up from mud. It also helps with winter protection, so you can mulch strawberries with straw to help them if we have a frost. It helps with bloom delay, it can help with weed suppression, keeps those berries clean. Dry walkways. If you're in a spot like Wilson County right now, it's rained about every day for the past 3 months, it feels like, and it rained again today. But it looks like it's going to dry up for the next few days. But if I walk through my garden right now, I will probably sink up to my ankles in mud. And also, I mentioned that disease suppression if you keep the soil off of the plant leaves. Maybe I can shimmy this over just a little bit. So you can see that. We see people use some protective structures on strawberries, so that would be a season extension. So if you're trying to grow some for the farmer's market or the store, and you're trying to be the first one there, some of these little high tunnels work out really well. It can also increase yield, less disease pressure, and also physical exclusion from insects and wildlife. So that can be pros and cons, because we need bees to pollinate on some of these things. So you may have to open it up to allow bees. If these blooms get hit with a gentle frost, the center will turn black and the flower will actually die. So I wanted to show you what a frostbitten flower looks like, because blueberry flowers are a little more frost resistant because their flowers hang upside down. Strawberry flowers face up. So they're more susceptible to some of these really light frosts. So that's actually a damaged flower on a strawberry. Grapes in Tennessee, we have a lot of different varieties out there, and if you can, focus on those that are American or French American varieties because they seem to be best. Whoop. They need a root depth of 30 inches or more, which may be a challenge in some areas in Tennessee to begin with, but I think some of you will be able to do it just fine. And as soon as you get those grapes in the ground, a trellis should be built ASAP. So kind of talking about, let me move this again. We need to be planting them right now. If you can find dormant canes already, 5.5 to 6.5 pH, prune all buds except for one. So I'm going to show you some pictures of a trellising type system where you need to leave one long vine so that you can actually run it up, but you need to prune off all other buds that are popping up on the side of the vine. They need full sun. Must prune annually to keep growth healthy and prune in late winter before new growth occurs. So that should have happened about a month ago. Now, I have some fruit trees here at my house that are already starting to leaf out. We've seen pears blooming right now. It's too late to kind of prune some of these fruit trees, but if you haven't done so, just kind of use your best judgment on some of those. If we're growing grapes, we need to have some type of a support system when we plant these things because sometimes these vines will grow quite a bit of feet in 1 year. We need to leave all the vines except for one, just let it grow up. And if we have 2 different trellising type systems, leave those little buds on the side so that you have canes going out on each side. So this fencing is basically an H brace at one end you can see on the left, and they've stretched woven wire on one end and tied it to the other end. So all the buds that are popping up on the sides, they all need to be pruned off except for the growing tips where you're going to have those vines actually wrapping around that wire. Hopefully that just made sense. Grapes are not immune to a lot of issues. We have Japanese beetles. We have black rot in grapes, and if you're looking for recommendations on sprays for some of these, University of Tennessee has a great fruit tree spray guide, and you can email any of your extension agents and they'll send you a link to that, or you can email me and I'll send you a link to that also. So wrapping up, I wanted to finish in about 30 minutes today, and I think I got it done. UTExtension.tennessee.edu is the contact information for you wherever you're at in the state. So you can click on that. That's the University of Tennessee's Extension website. You click on it, and it says Find My County. You click on your county, and it takes you to the people in your county that you're looking for. Contact your local extension agent that you may be having questions for family and consumer science type nature, which may be canning, cooking related. 4-H type questions, agriculture, natural resources, livestock, forage, horticulture type questions. We are here to help you with a lot of these questions. And if we don't know the answer, we know the people who know the answer. And at this time, email may be best. And if you're looking at some issues in your lawn and you're trying to describe them over email, it may just be best to email them some pictures if that's possible. That way they can kind of get you some of the help that you can. So I think that's all that I got, Shelly. So if you want to stop, and I think Shelly may have shared some recipes in the chat box if you were looking for any of those. So we were trying to highlight different recipes for everybody.
Lucas, I added recipes as well as canning instructions for these foods. And then I thought we do have some people on now. Do you want to open up for questions if they have any verbally?
Yeah. Yeah, this is a new option for us. We were trying to Zoom. Feel free to ask any questions that you may have. You can go to that chat box over there. It's probably highlighted as orange. Hey, Lee, thanks for joining us. Good luck in East Tennessee.
Well, thank you, Lucas.
Mm-hmm.
And this was recorded today, so you're able to go back and through. So anybody who's watching or any master gardeners or anything, this was a lot of the basic type information. If you have more in-depth type questions, anybody who's watching right now, feel free to contact any of your extension agents. Now, tomorrow we're going to be looking at tree fruits. Thank you, Shelly.
What about elderberries? Have you
Yeah,
had any luck with that, Lucas?
they're extremely to grow, and they can actually be a noxious weed sometimes. Now,
What do
what's
you?
unique is there's two different species. You have a Sambucus nigra and you have a Sambucus canadensis, and there's different cultivars of them. So
Okay.
now Dr. Lockwood at Knoxville has a list of some of the better cultivars of elderberries. So we see the straight species for sale, but I think sometimes we see a lot of people forgetting there are some cultivars that have larger fruit and things like that. They're pretty
Wonderful.
disease resistant, pest resistant for Tennessee. And we're seeing an influx of elderberry questions right now.
Really, I have one at a master gardener's home, and she had a couple questions about it. So I may need to investigate Dr. Lockwood's
Yep.
publication. So
Yeah, and
thank
I
you.
don't know if I heard him do a talk, and he gave some of his recommendations on elderberry cultivars. And there are a lot of nurseries selling the different varieties of elderberries. They seem to have better fruit.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. Well, if nobody else has any questions, Shelly, if you'll hit unrecord.
Will, and I just want to remind everybody, Lucas, that we will upload this to our new UT-TSU Extension Wilson County YouTube page or channel. I think that's called a channel. And so we'll also post that link on our social media accounts, right?
Yes. Yep.
All righty. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank